have never been able to sleep. For 19 years, my brain has never shut down, not even for a second. My cranial nerves lack the basic function of resting and sleeping entirely. When I was 16, the Fords removed me from an orphanage and installed me in the fully sealed, top-floor medical suite of their private tower. Blaine Ford had lost half his brain stem in a catastrophic car crash. The neural AI keeping his consciousness intact across the globe relied solely on my non-stop human brainwave for real-time anchoring. I stay awake, and he lives. I fall asleep, and he dies. A year ago, a nurse accidentally mixed a trace of sedative into my nutrient infusion. My consciousness blurred for 3 seconds. Midway through a corporate board meeting thousands of miles away, Blaine Ford collapsed on the spot, his heart rate dropping to 0 instantly. The next day, the nurse had her medical license revoked, and the pharmacy that supplied the sedative was permanently blacklisted from the industry. After that, the air composition in my room was monitored second by second. Even hand cream infused with lavender essential oil was banned from the premises entirely. Everything changed when Blaine flew to the Middle East for a summit. His fiancée, Charlotte Wade, took over full temporary authority of the medical tower. She scanned the pages of my monthly 8-figure medical bills and snorted, a cold, dismissive sound. The Fords keep you housed just to watch you stare blankly like a useless, dead weight. She dismissed the entire night nursing team, unplugged my brainwave anchor cables, and dragged me out of the constant temperature sterile pod. Then she pried my jaw open and forced an entire strip of sleeping pills down my throat. They say you never sleep. Let's test that theory. I dropped to my knees and clawed at my throat, desperate to vomit the pills up, but 3 tablets had already dissolved into my stomach lining. For the first time in 19 years, my eyelids grew heavy. The brainwave anchoring system flashed a critical red alert, and Charlotte slammed her palm down to shut it off. She had no idea. 7 time zones away, Blaine Ford's consciousness faded right along with mine. MS. Wade. Dylan Reese, the on-duty systems engineer, burst into the room. He spotted the loose cables on the floor and my crumpled kneeling form, and his face drained of all color in an instant. Who authorized you to disconnect the anchor line? Charlotte's expression turned icy. Watch how you speak to me. Ignoring her entirely, Dylan dropped to his knees beside me and reached for the cables. Mia, stay awake. Do you hear me? Keep your eyes open, don't fall asleep. I struggled to hold my eyes open, but the weight behind my lids grew unbearable. Charlotte pressed her shoe hard down on the loose cables, pinning them to the floor. Did I give you permission to reconnect that? Dylan's head snapped up, a raw edge of panic in his voice. MS. Wade, this is no ordinary monitoring cable. This is the core anchor channel for Mr. Ford's neural AI consciousness. Second Mia falls asleep, his entire neural system will go offline. In the worst case, his consciousness will erase completely. Charlotte stared back, utterly unbothered and skeptical. So what? She picked up the cable, twinning it loosely around her finger. The great Blaine Ford's life depends entirely on whether this girl keeps her eyes open. Dylan gritted his teeth. Yes. A colder, sharper smile tugged at Charlotte's lips. The Ford family's been keeping a living miracle locked up here. She turned her gaze back to me. Me your trick, Mia. Nobody orphaned from a charity shelter, living in the most exclusive medical tower in the state, hooked up to the most expensive equipment money can buy, with an entire neural research team waiting on you hand and foot. Now Blaine's life hinges on yours. I tried to speak, to explain, but my throat burned with the bitter residue of sedatives and the coppery tang of bile. The sleeping pills finally kicked in fully. I could feel my brainwave activity plummeting, sharp and steady. The implanted interface behind my ear burned hot, linking my mind directly to Blaine's. 7 time zones away, in that summit venue, he must have felt it too. Dylan's eyes reddened with urgent desperation. MS. Wade, check the access logs if you need to, wait for Mr. Ford's father to return, but reconnect the cable right now. Second that passes puts him in mortal danger. A flicker of hesitation crossed Charlotte's face, but it vanished the next second. Her phone rang then, the screen lighting up with an encrypted incoming call. The caller ID read, Middle East on-site medical team. Dylan latched onto the hope instantly. Answer it. Please, that has to be Mr. Ford's team calling with an emergency. Charlotte stared at the screen for 2 long seconds. Then she pressed end call, right in front of us. Dylan froze completely. I went rigid with shock too. Charlotte flipped her phone face down on the console. Before he left for the Middle East, Blaine gave me temporary full control of this tower. That means he trusts me. I make the rules here now. She glanced toward the door at the station bodyguards. Engineer Reese out. Dylan's voice rose sharply with anger and fear. Charlotte Wade, you'll regret this. Charlotte chuckled coldly. Only regret is not finding out about this little secret of the Fords sooner. A secret. That was all I was to her. Two bodyguards stepped forward and dragged Dylan out by force. Dylan struggled fiercely, veins bulging on his forehead. Mia, stay awake. Do you hear me? Don't fall asleep. Blaine has always treated you well. The door slammed shut, cutting off his voice entirely. Only Charlotte and I remained in the sterile room, along with the dirty, discarded anchor cable lying on the floor. I dragged myself forward with my last shred of strength. My fingertips barely brushed the cable end before Charlotte's shoe came down hard, grinding over my knuckles. A faint, sharp cracking sound echoed through the quiet room. Pain racked my entire body, making me tremble violently. Still putting on a show, she knelt down and patted my cheek mockingly. Thought you never slept. Prove it to me. I stared up at her, my vision blurring rapidly at the edges. Blaine. Charlotte's eyes turned sharp with rage. You have no right to say his name. She grabbed a fistful of my hair and forced my head up. Remember this, Mia. Blaine Ford is my fiancé. You're nothing but a human machine the Ford family pays to keep running. A machine should know its place. I tried to speak, to explain, but no words would come out. A harsh static noise exploded in my mind, not from any system in the room, but from Blaine's neural AI, transmitting directly through the residual interface in my skull. The voice was broken, fragmented, fatting fast. Mia, don't. Sleepy tears spilled down my cheeks instantly. Blaine was still conscious. He was still reaching for me. I lifted my shaking hand and grabbed the cuff of her blazer with my last ounce of strength. Put it back, please. Charlotte ripped her arm away in disgust. You're begging me now. She stood tall, staring down at me with cold disdain. Then stay on your knees. I'll decide when you've earned the right to stop this little act. Body finally gave out completely. My forehead slammed heavily against the cold floor. My consciousness sank downward, dragged into a bottomless, dark abyss. For 19 years, I'd never known drowsiness was not gentle. It crept over me like death, swallowing every glimmer of light little by little. In my final moment of clarity, the backup wall system rebooted automatically. Crimson emergency lights flooded the entire room. Anchor source brainwave below safety threshold. Target consciousness cloud drift rate, 37%. Target consciousness cloud drift rate, 61%. Target consciousness cloud drift rate, 89%. Charlotte finally frowned, a flicker of unease crossing her face. What is all this nonsense? No one answered her. 7 time zones away, inside the Middle East Summit venue, Blaine Ford sat in his intelligent wheelchair, negotiating contract terms with a rival conglomerate via his neural AI interface. 1 second, he was calmly reviewing the final page of the agreement. The next, his pupils lost all focus, turning vacant and empty. His powered exoskeleton lost all neural input and crashed heavily to the ground. Chaos erupted across the conference floor instantly. The on-site medical team rushed forward, their faces ashen as they stared at the monitoring screen. Blaine's vital signs and heart rate remained stable, but the golden waveform representing his active consciousness was flattening out second by second. The lead doctor's hands shook violently as he dialed Charlotte's number. First call, rejected. Second call, no connection. Third call, powered off entirely. Back in the top-floor medical tower, Charlotte grew irritable at the non-stop emergency alerts flashing across every screen. Turn off all these annoying alarms. She turned and headed for the door. First thing tomorrow, pull and audit every medical expense logged for Mia over the past 3 years. Fords are not a charity. We will not waste millions on a fraud who endangers lives the second she falls asleep. She never knew that the moment the door clicked shut behind her, the last flicker of light in Blaine Ford's consciousness cloud winked out forever. I never truly fell asleep. Or rather, my brain had forgotten how to sleep after 19 years of constant wakefulness. Even the powerful sleeping pills could not force me into real slumber, only dragging me into a dying, muddled chaos. I couldn't make out complete sounds, only the fragmented screech of emergency alerts. Anchor source brainwave declining continuously. Target consciousness cloud connection failed. Restore primary anchor channel immediately. I tried to open my eyes, but my eyelids felt sealed shut with lead. The bitter taste of pills lingered in my throat, and violent stomach spasms racked my body in waves. I had no sense of time passing until a sharp slap jolted my cheek. Wake up. Stop faking death. Charlotte Wade's voice drifted from a distant haze, cold and utterly devoid of warmth. I pried my eyes open with immense effort, and the harsh hospital lights stung sharply. Charlotte stood beside the medical bed, flanked by 2 bodyguards and a regular on-call physician summoned in haste. The doctor's face tightened at my condition. MS. Wade, her pupillary response is negligible and her blood pressure is crashing. She needs gastric lavage. Now, Charlotte frowned coldly. I brought you here to prove she's faking her symptoms, not to listen to your alarmist nonsense. Doctor spoke with obvious hesitation. She has clearly ingested a dangerous dosage of sedative medication, ma'am. Dosage? Charlotte let out a mocking laugh. She's supposed to be incapable of sleep, isn't she? If she never sleeps, how can a few sleeping pills possibly overdose her? The doctor fell silent at a loss for words. I parted my trembling lips, my voice so faint it was barely audible. The cable. Charlotte glanced down at me, still clinging to that useless cable. I strained every ounce of strength to gaze toward the corner of the room. The brainwave anchor cable still lay abandoned on the floor, if I could just reconnect it. If I could re-establish the link, Blaine might still have a chance. I propped myself up on my elbows, desperate to rise, but my body felt limp and foreign, beyond my control. The slightest movement sent a tearing, burning pain exploding from the neural interface at the base of my neck. Move. The doctor lunged forward instinctively to hold me down. Neural implant is overheating. Any further strain will cause irreversible nerve damage. Damage? Charlotte sounded almost amused, as if she had heard a ridiculous joke. She walked slowly to my side and bent down to stare straight at me. Mia, haven't you been scamming the Ford family out of millions with this little implant? Let's see how well you perform without it. Breath caught in pure terror. A violent pounding suddenly erupted from the sealed hallway door. MS. Wade, open the door. It was Dylan Reese, his voice shredded from shouting. We've lost all contact with Mr. Ford. The Middle East medical team has sent 12 consecutive emergency red alerts. Mia must reconnect the anchor channel immediately. Charlotte's expression darkened completely. Her patience snapped thin. She turned sharply to the bodyguards. Why is he still on the top floor? One bodyguard lowered his voice respectfully. Engineer Reese holds high-level clearance, ma'am. The lower-level access barriers cannot block him. Charlotte sneered coldly. Revoke his access privileges at once. She grabbed the temporary authorization terminal on the table and pressed confirm without hesitation. The fierce pounding outside ceased instantly. Dylan's voice shifted, sharp and disbelieving. Charlotte, you just froze the neural engineering team's clearance. Do you have any idea what this means? Charlotte strolled to the door and spoke calmly through the thick panel. It means this top-floor ward is no longer your personal playground to burn the Ford family's money in Blaine's name. MS. Wade. Dylan shouted in urgent fury. You're going to kill Mr. Ford. Enough. Charlotte's voice rose sharply, laced with unbridled rage. All of you keep chanting his name, keep saying she cannot sleep. Blaine is my fiancé. If he was truly in mortal danger, why has he never told me a single word about this? Dead silence hung in the hallway for a long moment. Then Dylan's hollow, defeated voice came through the door. Mr. Ford never wanted you to know Mia exists. Charlotte's face blanched in an instant. She tightened her grip on the terminal, her jaw clenched hard. What did you just say? Dylan sounded completely unreserved now, as if he had nothing left to lose. Mr. Ford signed a top-tier non-disclosure agreement years ago. Fewer than 7 people in the entire world know Mia's true function. You are not on that list. You accept it or not, Ms. Wade. Mia matters more than you do in Mr. Ford's life support system. The words pierced straight through Charlotte's deepest insecurity like a sharp needle. Her polished composure shattered. More important than me. She turned slowly to face me on the bed. In that moment, I knew everything was ruined. She had not been convinced. She had been provoked. She stepped toward me, her eyes dark and menacing. You hear that? They say you mean more to him than I do. I tried to shake my head, but my body refused to move. Charlotte suddenly reached out and pinched my jaw hard enough to bruise. You're just an unwanted orphan from a shelter. What could you possibly have that I don't? She forced my head up, locking my gaze to hers. It this face? Or is it that freakish thing inside your brain? My pupils trembled violently. Charlotte caught the reaction and smiled coldly. There really is something special about you. Doctor's face turned pale with panic. MS. Wade, you cannot tamper with the neural implant, not while she's sedated and mentally unstable. Forced examination will cause permanent brain damage. Examination. Charlotte released my jaw, her tone terrifyingly calm. No, calling an internal tribunal. Tomorrow morning at 9, assemble all senior executives of the Ford Medical Tower. I want every single one of them to see exactly what kind of monster the Ford family has been sheltering for 3 years. The doctor grew frantic. But she requires urgent resuscitation now. Charlotte shot him a frigid glance. Dead? The doctor fell silent, stalled by the question. If she's alive, she can wait until tomorrow. With that, she turned and walked out of the room. The second the door clicked shut, darkness swallowed my world once again. But this time, from within the depths of that endless static, a voice filtered through. Faint. Fragile. It was someone shouting for me desperately across an unimaginable distance. Mia, hold on. A single tear slipped from the corner of my eye. Blaine, you're still here. Then I cannot fall asleep. At 9 the next morning, I was wheeled into the 7th floor conference suite of the Ford Medical Tower. No chair waited for me. Tight restraints pinned me flat on a rolling exam table. Executives packed the room. Medical admins, finance officers, compliance inspectors, corporate legal staff, plus unfamiliar Ford conglomerate board directors all sat watching. Their eyes weighed on me, shifting between suspicious appraisal, revulsion, and quiet dread. Charlotte Wade stood at the head table, my full medical invoices projected across the oversized rear screen. Towering costs is a slightly unusual metaphor. Burned sharp on display is evocative, but could be more integrated with the corporate setting. Sterile containment pod upkeep, replacement parts for cranial neural implants, ongoing calibration of the brainwave sync network, round-the-clock care personnel payroll, real-time air filtration and atmospheric composition surveillance. Every listed charge equaled lifelong earnings for average civilians. Charlotte tapped the display with a laser pointer. Everyone, these tally Mia's total charges against the Ford estate across 3 years. The monthly charges consistently run into the tens of millions. For all that funding, she only occupies a top-floor climate-controlled pod and stares vacantly all day. Chatter rustled through the crowd. How is it physically possible for a human to skip sleep entirely? I long suspected the top-level research program hid too many secrets. Numerous expenditures went unreviewed once Mr. Ford's accident left him incapacitated. Could there be deliberate fraud behind this? Each murmur dragged my heart lower. None grasped the full truth. No attendee held the security clearance required to learn it. Charlotte banked entirely on that blind spot. She planned to let these uninformed officials pass formal judgment over me. One board member cut into the noise carefully. MS. Wade, Mr. Ford assigned temporary site oversight to you pre-departure, yet the top-floor ward fell under Senior Mr. Ford's exclusive management. An open public hearing like this feels improper. Charlotte tipped her head in a thin smile. Advanced age leaves the elder Ford vulnerable to manipulation. As Blaine's fiancé, I bear responsibility to root out financial hazards threatening the family. She turned toward my restrained form. I'll offer you a single chance, Mia. Admit before everyone here you inflated your medical condition, falsified anchor brainwave data, and siphoned Ford capital alongside the neural engineering team. Throat split dry and raw. I never did. My whisper drowned beneath surrounding discussion. Charlotte strode forward and slapped a formal document onto my torso. Sign it. I dropped my gaze to the paper. A formal admission of medical fraud. Pre-written accusations filled every line. Fabrication of an extremely rare neurological disorder. Collusion with engineering staff to embezzle clinical funding. Wrongful long-term occupancy of premium Ford medical facilities under false psychiatric claims. Voluntary consent to full implant removal and full investigative cooperation. My fingertips trembled nonstop. They cannot remove it. Charlotte bent close. What stops removal? I scraped together every last reserve of strength. Blaine will die. A beat of silence hung across the suite, then mocking snickers burst out. She truly believes she controls Mr. Ford's survival. This moves past fraud into severe delusional disorder. Charlotte savored their reaction, exactly what she had aimed for. Every honest claim I made twisted into rambling madness in their ears. A commotion erupted at the doorway. Guards blocked Dylan Reese outside, the engineer clutching a spare neural control terminal, sweat glistening across his forehead. "Charlotte, let me inside." Blaine's consciousness cloud fractured 3 separate times overnight. Primary network loses all stable connection. Middle East medical crews run maximum emergency resuscitation protocols right now. Shock rippled through every seated guest. Charlotte's features hardened sharply. "Who permitted his arrival?" Dylan locked unblinking eyes on her. "I'll state this plainly once more. Mia commits no fraud whatsoever." Mind functions as the sole fixed anchor for Blaine's consciousness AI. Drugging her with sleeping pills last night amounts to attempted murder of Blaine Ford. The word murder stunned the entire room silent. Charlotte let out a cool laugh. "Dylan, do you understand what accusations you spout?" "I do." His voice shook with strained resolve. "I take full legal accountability for every word." Charlotte nodded toward the firm's legal counsel. "Document this record. Neural engineer Dylan Reese attempts intimidation via false life-or-death threats to cover ongoing medical embezzlement." Dylan's face drained to ashen gray. "You've lost your mind entirely." Ignoring his outburst, Charlotte returned to the head table and swept her gaze over attendees. "Given such heavy dispute, we resolve matters with direct physical examination." Heart plummeted, Charlotte spoke slowly and clearly. "A neural implant sits embedded at Mia's nape. Dylan swears this single chip keeps Blaine Ford alive. I intend to verify firsthand how an implant inside an orphan's skull sustains the entire Ford heir's existence." She addressed the assembled medical crew. "Prepare for implant extraction." Dead stillness fell across the conference room. The hastily summoned attending surgeon paled instantly. "MS. Wade, this procedure violates standard clinical protocol." Sedatives linger in her system. Her brainwave patterns remain drastically unstable, unsuitable for any invasive operation. Charlotte shot him an icy retort. "Are you a licensed physician, or her accomplice?" The doctor clamped his mouth shut without further protest. Charlotte tapped her administrative authorization pad. "I hold full temporary Ford facility governance rights. Any staff refusing orders faces immediate suspension." Cold dread seeped into every inch of my body, not from impending surgical pain, but certain knowledge. Forced extraction would erase Blaine's consciousness permanently. I shook my head frantically, binding straps cutting raw grooves into my wrists. "Please don't, I beg you." Charlotte stepped beside the exam bed and leaned down to stare into my eyes. "Now you beg for mercy." Her fingertip traced the cooling patch on my nape with a deceptive gentleness, every syllable dripping with venom. "Mia, you claim you cannot fall asleep naturally. We pull this implant free. I'll grant you the uninterrupted sleep you've never known." They pushed me into the stark, bright light of the surgical observation suite. Beyond, the full-length transparent glass stood every participant from the tribunal, watching like spectators at a bizarre, controlled experiment. Staff repositioned me on my side, fully exposing the nape of my neck under the harsh surgical lights. A faint, crescent-shaped scar lingered there, old and faded. 3 years prior, right after the Ford family took me in, their lead neural engineer had surgically implanted my brainwave anchor interface. He'd told me then it was never merely hardware. It was a bridge, one end tethered to me, the other anchored to Blaine Ford. That was the first time I'd seen Blaine. He lay motionless inside a sterile isolation pod, pale-skinned yet peaceful in repose. Once the neural AI activated, he'd spoken his first words to me through the monitor screen. "Mia, thank you for staying awake." I'd frozen for a long time after hearing that. All my life, everyone had labeled my inability to sleep a freak disorder. Only him thanked me for my endless wakefulness. Now Charlotte was about to sever that bridge with her own hands. The surgeon pulled on sterile gloves but hesitated to make the first cut. "MS. Wade, at minimum wait for Mr. Ford Sr. to return. Or wait for the overseas medical team to confirm Mr. Ford's current condition." Charlotte stood beside the table, her tone frigid and unyielding. "I have made myself clear. The extraction happens today. If complications arise," the surgeon spoke reluctantly, "I will take full responsibility." Charlotte cut him off instantly. She glanced out at the crowd behind the glass. "Every one of you here serves as witness. I am merely excising a malignancy from the Ford medical system." With that, she pressed firm hands to my shoulders to hold me still. "Proceed." Cold antiseptic spread across my neck, and my body trembled uncontrollably. No anesthesia could be administered. Any sedative would further crash my failing brainwave activity. When the scalpel cut, I felt it all. The searing slice of the blade, the separate, sickening pressure as it parted skin and tissue. Every sensation was magnified by a mind denied the mercy of anesthesia. Agony exploded straight into my cranial nerves. I opened my mouth but could not scream, no sound escaping my throat. Cold sweat soaked through my surgical gown. Several onlookers behind the glass turned their heads away. A few murmured quietly, "This is going too far." Charlotte caught the words and smirked faintly. "You feel sympathy for her? Choose wisely. Grieve for a fraud or grieve for the Ford capital she's drained." The room fell silent at once. The second cut dug deeper. Surgical tools probed beneath the skin, and the moment they brushed the interface base, my vision blurred to black. A shrill electric static buzzed in my ears. Warning, primary anchor neural interface damaged. Target consciousness cloud reconnection failed. Emergency protection protocol activated. Blaine's voice echoed in my mind, a threadbare whisper compared to last night's. Yet it cut through the static with perfect, devastating clarity. "Mia, don't be afraid." Tears spilled down my cheeks and crashed onto the surgical table. I feared no pain. I only feared losing him forever. I fought desperately to cling to consciousness, but residual sedatives, blood loss, searing pain, and interface damage dragged me relentlessly toward darkness. The surgeon's voice shook with panic. "MS. Wade, we cannot continue. Her brainwave activity is collapsing completely." Charlotte's expression flickered with unease, then hardened into icy resolve. "We have come too far to stop now. All progress will be wasted." She glanced at the monitoring screen. "Extract the chip." The surgeon froze, refusing to move. Charlotte snatched a pair of sterile forceps from the tray herself. Outside the glass, Dylan slammed his body against the door in a frenzy. "That is a two-way anchor chip. Pull it out, and you sever Mr. Ford's consciousness entirely." Charlotte turned to stare at him coldly. "Then I will see for myself if Blaine Ford would sacrifice himself for her." She leaned over me. The forceps clamped tight around the microchip buried deep in my neck tissue. In the next second, she pulled it free in one sharp, brutal tug. Scream finally tore out of my throat. It felt as if someone had ripped a piece of my soul clean from my body. Every sound faded instantly. Lights, alarms, watching figures, all blurred and distant. Only endless, boundless darkness remained. Every monitor in the surgical suite flashed solid red simultaneously. Primary anchor channel disconnected. Anchor source brainwave collapsing to 0. Target consciousness cloud lost all positional coordinates. Blaine Ford neural AI, offline. Charlotte stared blankly at the bloodied microchip clamped in her forceps. She stared at the screaming monitors, finally sensing catastrophic error. But it was far too late. My eyelids drifted slowly shut. For the first time in 19 years, I fell asleep. At that exact moment, the observation suite door crashed open from the outside. Blaine's lead traveling physician burst in, drenched in cold sweat, clutching a transoceanic communication terminal. The screen displayed utter chaos inside the Middle East Emergency Resuscitation Unit. When his eyes landed on the chip in Charlotte's hand, all color drained from his face. "MS. Wade. Mr. Ford's consciousness, it's gone. We've lost him." Charlotte's pupils constricted sharply. "What did you say?" The doctor's voice broke completely, raw and devastated. His heart still beats, but his consciousness no longer exists. "We can no longer detect any trace of him on the global neural cloud network." A deathly silence crashed over the observation suite. The microchip slipped from Charlotte's fingers and clattered to the floor. The tiny clink was deafening in the silence, a sound freighted with the weight of what had just been lost. She recoiled as if struck, her balance deserting her for a half step. Stunned, disoriented. "This is impossible." Lying. Could never die because of her. Her sentence broke off abruptly. Sharp, hurried footsteps echoed down the corridor. Elder Mr. Ford had arrived. Nearing 70, the elderly patriarch leaned on a cane, supported by his aides as he stepped into the suite. His gaze fell first on my unconscious form resting on the surgical table, then locked on the bloodied anchor chip lying on the floor. All color drained from his face in an instant. Who did this? No one dared to speak a word. Charlotte parted her trembling lips in a rush to defend herself. "Mr. Ford, I did this for Blaine." Crack. A sharp, heavy slap slammed across her cheek. Charlotte's head snapped to the side, her earring flying off and clattering on the ground. The entire room held its breath. The old man's hands shook with suppressed rage. For Blaine. You tore his life from him with your own hands, and you dare stand there and say it was for his own good. Charlotte pressed a shaking palm to her stinging cheek, tears flooding her eyes instantly. I had no idea. No one ever told me the truth. She's an outsider. Why does she get the best resources the Ford family owns? Why does everyone shield her above all else? Elder Mr. Ford closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them again, only icy coldness remained in his gaze. She stays awake, and that is the only reason Blaine still draws breath. Charlotte froze completely, rooted to the spot in shock. Dylan burst into the room, dropped to his knees, and fumbled to pick up the fallen chip, his hands shaking so violently he could barely grip it. The interface is torn, the chip is contaminated, and the anchor source is trapped in deep drug-induced sleep. We have to repair the connection immediately. The chief neural physician barked urgent orders. Transport Mia back to the main control pod at once. Initiate reverse brainwave wake-up protocol. Alert the overseas medical team to sustain Mr. Ford's vital circulation and wait for Mia's recovery at all costs. I was rushed down the emergency resuscitation corridor. My consciousness sank deep into endless darkness, cut off from all sound and sensation. But outside my quiet oblivion, the entire world had fallen apart. In the main control hall, massive screens pulled up 3 full years of synchronized neural data. Every fluctuation in my brainwave patterns perfectly aligned with every shift in Blaine's consciousness AI 1 year ago. Trace sedatives had accidentally contaminated my nutrient solution. My consciousness blurred for 3 seconds. Blaine's heart rate flatlined for 27 seconds. 3 months ago, a high fever destabilized my brainwaves. Blaine's overseas conference crashed mid-session, his neural AI drifting offline for 15 minutes. The night before, Charlotte had unplugged the cable, forced sedatives down my throat, silenced the emergency alarms, and rejected all urgent communications. Blaine's consciousness cloud fractured 3 separate times. Today, the chip had been ripped from my neck. Blaine's consciousness coordinates had vanished entirely from the system. The cold, irrefutable data streamed past, a damning indictment that landed like a physical blow on everyone who saw it. The board members who had questioned and doubted me earlier now stood utterly speechless. Charlotte stood motionless, her face drained of all color, pale as blank paper. She whispered numbly to herself, "This can't be. This defies all logic." Dylan lifted his head, his eyes bloodshot and burning with fury. "Now you want to talk about logic? How many times did we warn you yesterday? Did you listen to a single word?" Charlotte turned to Elder Mr. Ford, voice trembling, begging for understanding. "Mr. Ford, I truly did know. I only thought she was deceiving Blaine, wasting the family's resources. The old man did not spare her a single glance. Effective immediately, revoke all temporary administrative privileges granted to Charlotte Wade." Down the entire medical tower. "No one who participated in the removal of Mia's interface is permitted to leave the premises." Charlotte's head jolted up in panic. "Mr. Ford," the elderly voice rang thin and weathered, yet every word cut sharp as a blade. "Pray she wakes up. She regains consciousness. Blaine may still have a chance to return. If she never wakes," he fixed a deadly gaze on Charlotte, "your entire family will answer for Blaine Ford's life." I fell endlessly through boundless darkness. No sound existed here, no light. And no Blaine Ford. The emptiness terrified me. For 19 years, I had never once slept. The world described sleep as rest, as dreams, as soft stillness under night skis. But my first taste of sleep was like being buried alive. I could not wake. I could not find an exit until a faint glimmer of golden light flickered far in the distance, thin and fragile like a dying lantern. "Mia," Blaine's voice echoed through the void. I tried to answer. But I had no mouth, no physical form, no capacity to rouse myself. "Stop falling. Look at me." I strained toward that wisp of light with every fragment of my fatting awareness. Outside my consciousness, chaos erupted inside the emergency resuscitation room. Dylan leaned over the microscopic workstation, magnifying lenses fixed over his eyes, repairing the contaminated anchor chip with trembling precision. The core remains intact, but 2 outer synchronization pins are completely severed. "Can it be fixed?" Elder Ford's voice came hoarse and strained. Sweat dripped into Dylan's eyes. "I don't know," he said, his voice strained. "There's no blueprint for this. This is the only dual-directional anchor chip in existence. It was custom calibrated to match Mia's unique neural structure 3 years ago. No spare parts exist. The chief physician stared rigidly at my brainwave monitor. Her brainwave activity continues plummeting. In 15 more minutes, she will enter irreversible neural shutdown. Elder Ford's expression shattered. I was told she cannot sleep. The doctor fell silent briefly. She possesses no natural sleep cycle, true, but forced sedation, extreme surgical trauma, and complete interface removal have overwhelmed her system. Brain is not sleeping right now. It's powering down entirely. The statement sent a cold chill sweeping through every person present. Elder Ford closed his eyes. Bring her back. Doctor spoke low and hesitant. There is one method. We can administer a forced wakefulness agent to jolt her deep cranial nerves back into operation. Dylan's head shot up in alarm. Her brain has operated nonstop for 19 years under constant overload. Forced stimulation will inflict severe neural damage. She could suffer permanent memory loss, chronic seizures, or worse. He left the words unspoken, yet everyone understood the fatal risk. Elder Ford tightened his grip on his cane, knuckles whitening. At that moment, Charlotte broke past security confinement in the outer hall and burst into the room. Then what are we waiting for? Give her the shot. Blaine still depends on her to survive. Dylan surged forward and grabbed her collar sharply. Shut your mouth. Who pushed her into this state? Charlotte flinched at his roar but quickly snapped back, voice shrill and desperate. She's a tool for Blaine. That's all she is. The Ford family housed and funded her for 3 years. This is the exact purpose she serves. Elder Ford finally lifted his gaze to her. The icy cold in his eyes froze her words mid-sentence. She is not a means to an end for Blaine. Our family owes her the life we took from her. Charlotte stared blankly, utterly stunned. Elder Ford turned back to the medical team. Is there any other alternative? The doctor shook his head heavily. Only if residual fragments of Mr. Ford's consciousness actively re-anchor. But his neural signature is completely undetectable on the global neural cloud. The second the words landed, the main monitor flickered faintly. A faint golden ripple bloomed across the black screen. Dylan whipped his head toward the display. Wait, we have a signal. Every gaze locked on the screen. The golden waveform representing Blaine's consciousness flared for a split second. Then text materialized slowly across the monitor. Save her first. Dead silence blanketed the control hall. Another line of text emerged. Do not hurt her. Elder Ford's eyes reddened instantly. Blaine, the golden font trembled violently, unstable and flickering on the verge of dissipation. I will find my way back. Let her wake gently. Dylan gritted his teeth hard, eyes glistening. Mr. Ford is using his last residual consciousness to lock onto Mia's neural signature. He's rebuilding her path back to wakefulness. Elder Ford spoke in a cracked, muted tone. Adjust the treatment plan accordingly. Doctor revised the protocol instantly, discarding the forced wakefulness agent entirely. Instead, the team repaired the damaged chip and let Blaine's lingering consciousness guide my collapsing brainwave patterns backward. 1 hour passed, 2 hours passed, 3 hours passed. At 4:17 in the early morning, my eyelids fluttered faintly. On the monitor, a thread of blue light, Mia's brainwave, flickered, then caught. It steadied, pulse by fragile pulse. In the distant Middle Eastern emergency suite, a medical staffer gasped in raw shock. Mr. Ford's consciousness cloud has re-established positioning. Drift rate declining rapidly. Anchor linkage restored at 3%. Elder Ford leaned heavily against the observation glass, barely able to stand. Dylan hung his head, silent tears dripping onto his sterile gloves. I had not yet woken up, but I had stopped sinking into the dark, and Blaine Ford was still alive. The following afternoon, the Wades arrived. Gerald Wade, Charlotte's father, stormed into the medical tower flanked by corporate lawyers and PR personnel, their arrival commanding the lobby with palpable force. He spoke the moment he stepped inside. Elder Ford, you're holding my daughter over some nameless orphan girl. Has the Ford family completely lost its sense of proportion? Elder Ford had not slept through the night, his face haggard and ashen, yet he remained seated firmly in the main chair. Charlotte Wade is suspected of aggravated assault and endangering Blaine's life. She will not be released until the investigation concludes. Gerald let out a cold scoff. Aggravated assault. My daughter is Blaine's fiancée, the future matriarch of the Ford family. She audited questionable medical expenditures and disciplined a suspected fraud. What fault lies with her? Charlotte stood behind her father, her eyes red and swollen. She adopted a wounded tone. Dad, I truly only wanted to help Blaine. Kept secrets from me. I had every reason to suspect fraud when that girl drains 8 figures from the Ford estate every month. Gerald picked up her argument instantly. You hear that? My daughter only fulfilled her duties as a fiancée. It is the Ford family's wrongdoing for privately housing a woman who controls Blaine's life and hiding her from the Wades. How sincere is this engagement alliance, truly? Several Ford board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The Ford-Wade alliance anchored massive shared interests. The Wade Group had expanded rapidly in medical device manufacturing in recent years, controlling critical supply chains for multiple Ford overseas projects. A full fallout would inevitably destabilize stock prices and corporate operations. Gerald had clearly come fully prepared. He slid a formal legal letter across the conference table. We demand immediate custody of Mia for independent psychiatric and medical evaluation by a third-party institution. Furthermore, the Ford family must lift all restrictions on Charlotte and issue a public formal apology. Elder Ford laughed sharply, overcome with rage. Take Mia away. You still dare to lay a hand on her after everything that happened? Gerald's expression darkened. Elder Ford, I respect your seniority, but the Wade family will not be bullied. We are taking her today. The conference room doors sealed shut automatically. Click, 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 every access lock across the entire medical tower engaged simultaneously. The overhead lights dimmed for a split second. Then the main display screen flared to life. Golden neural circuitry unfurled slowly across the black monitor. A low, frigid voice tinged with digital distortion echoed through the speakers. Who intends to take her? Every head jolted upward in shock. Charlotte's face blanched pure white in an instant. She knew that voice too well. Blaine Ford. He had not fully recovered. His physical body still lay trapped in the Middle Eastern emergency pod, yet his consciousness had reconnected through the restored neural AI, projecting directly into the conference room. A half-body hologram materialized at the center of the screen, pale, frail, and visibly weakened. Yet the overwhelming authority of a born ruler lingered in his aura. He looked down upon the father and daughter Wades. Gerald Wade. Just referred to Mia as a suspected fraud. Gerald's Adam's apple bobbed nervously. Blaine, let me explain. Charlotte only acted for your sake. Blaine cut him off without a single glance. He spoke in a flat, unyielding tone. Lock down the entire medical tower. Pull full surveillance records. No one who harmed Mia yesterday leaves this building. Charlotte's legs buckled, nearly sending her collapsing to the floor. Blaine's gaze locked onto her. Though projected through a screen, his eyes cut sharp as blades. Charlotte Wade, I granted you temporary administrative authority. I did not grant you permission to end my life. Charlotte trembled uncontrollably. Blaine, I didn't know. Blaine's voice turned icy, devoid of any warmth. Lies. You were not unaware. You simply refused to see her as human. You only ever saw her as a tool the Fords kept in storage. Charlotte's face drained of every last trace of color. Blaine spoke slowly and deliberately. Today, I will let everyone learn the truth. Exactly what she is. First surveillance footage streamed across the main screen. The footage showed Charlotte entering my intensive care suite, browsing my medical billing records, and dismissing the night nursing staff. She then unplugged my brainwave transmission cable without hesitation. Emergency alarms blared instantly. I dropped to my knees on the floor, begging her to reconnect the cable. She simply silenced the blaring alarms with cold indifference. A collective, sharp intake of breath came from the Wade family contingent. The screen switched to a second clip. Dylan burst into the room, urgently warning Charlotte that Blaine's life hung in the balance. Charlotte rejected the incoming call from the Middle Eastern medical team and froze all access permissions for the Neural Engineering Division. Blaine's hollow, cold voice cut through the room. That was the first emergency alert from the resuscitation team. She answered it. Mia would never have needed to undergo surgery. Charlotte shook her head frantically, desperate to defend herself. I thought at the time. Blaine refused to grant her any chance to explain. The third surveillance video began to play. It captured her forcing my mouth open and shoving sleeping pills down my throat. The screen split into 2 displays, simultaneously showing Blaine's real-time consciousness waveform from that night. Every time my brainwave activity declined, his golden waveform fractured and destabilized. The moment she ripped the anchor chip from my neck, Blaine's consciousness cloud flatlined completely, the screen falling into total blackness. Gerald's composure finally shattered. He turned sharply toward his daughter, his voice lowered and frigid. "Charlotte, you never told me you drugged her." Charlotte broke, a mess of frantic irritation and despair. "I thought she couldn't sleep." Dylan let out a bitter, mocking laugh. "So you used her life for your reckless experiment?" Blaine lifted a hand, cutting the argument short. The footage on the screen switched instantly. This time, the displays no longer showed surveillance from the medical tower. Page after page of internal Wade Group confidential documents unfolded across the screen. Gerald's pupils contracted violently. "Blaine Ford, what is the meaning of this?" Blaine's tone remained steady and unshaken. "For the past 5 years, Wade Medical has exported neural monitoring equipment overseas with tampered core sensors, falsified certification credentials, and fabricated clinical trial data. I have been investigating your supply chain for 2 full years." Gerald shot abruptly to his feet, face twisted with rage and panic. "Do you dare, Blaine?" 3 of Ford's major overseas projects rely entirely on Wade's supply channels. "Move against me, and none of those projects will ever launch," Blaine replied in an unwavering, calm tone. "Regulatory authorities are already on their way." Overseas Wade corporate accounts were frozen 10 minutes ago. The elevator doors at the end of the hallway slid open. Financial investigation officers and regulatory task force members marched into the conference room in formation. Genuine panic finally crashed over Gerald. "Blaine, our families are bound by an engagement. You cannot do this." Blaine glanced indifferently in his direction. "An engagement? It ceased to exist the second Charlotte laid hands on Mia." Charlotte stumbled forward, pressing frantically against the screen. "Blaine, I'm sorry. I truly regret everything. You can't do this to me. I'm your fiancé." Blaine stared down at her, his eyes empty of every trace of emotion. "You should consider yourself fortunate that Mia survived. She had died. You would not be standing here begging for mercy." Turned toward the legal counsel standing at the side. "Charge Charlotte Wade with attempted intentional homicide, unauthorized intrusion into classified medical systems, and deliberate sabotage of life-sustaining equipment. Full legal charges against all involved personnel." The officers led her away, Charlotte completely shattered. She screamed my name, tears streaming, her voice raw. "Mia, wake up, please say something for me. I didn't mean to hurt anyone." I lay motionless inside the adjacent neural recovery pod, giving no response. Once she had dismissed every plea I made as a deliberate performance. Now it was finally her turn to understand the crushing despair of screaming into total silence. When I woke up, 5 days had passed. The second my eyes fluttered open, my hand instinctively flew to the nape of my neck. The interface was still there, newly fitted with an external protective casing. The sharp tang of antiseptic no longer lingered in the air. Instead, a faint, warm scent of sunlight wrapped around me. I stared blankly for a long moment. I had never once smelled genuine sunlight inside the top-floor ward. Blaine's holographic projection was positioned beside my bed. He looked far weaker than before, his form flickering faintly at intervals. He did not speak immediately upon seeing me awake. He simply watched me quietly. After a long silence, he whispered, "Mia, I'm sorry." I held his gaze. He rarely apologized in these 3 years, not out of arrogance. He had always arranged every single detail for me with meticulous precision. My meals, supplies, reading materials, room humidity, daily brainwave load, everything was perfectly calibrated. He never let me lack a single necessity, everything except freedom. I spoke softly. "What happened to Charlotte?" "She, in custody." "The Wades, the family empire has collapsed." I nodded slowly. I felt no surge of triumph, no rush of hatred. I only felt utterly exhausted. After 19 years of endless wakefulness, I finally understood one could grow so tired of being awake that one no longer had the strength to open their eyes. Blaine noticed my weariness. His voice softened further. "Does it still hurt?" I shook my head. Then I said the words I had long held in my heart. "Blaine, I want to leave." Projection froze slightly. Silence settled over the ward. I braced myself for anger, for the same insistence every Ford family member had voiced, that I could never leave, that his life would end without me. But he said nothing of the sort. He only asked gently, "Where do you want to go?" My eyes stung abruptly with tears. "Anywhere but here. Not this ward, not the sterile pod, not a room watched by cameras 24/7. I want to know who I am if I'm not your anchor." Fell silent for a very long time. Long enough that I feared his consciousness had disconnected again. Finally, he lifted his hand. A digital agreement unfolded beside the bed. This is a new anchor contract. I stared at the text on the screen. First clause, Mia retains full personal autonomy. The Ford family may not restrict her movements under any life-binding pretext. Second clause, brainwave anchoring is revised from mandatory binding to voluntary connection. Third clause, Mia holds absolute veto power and can sever the connection unconditionally at any time and in any location. Fourth clause, Blaine shall bear all life risks arising from disconnection independently. Fifth clause, the Ford family shall establish an independent trust, legal team, and private medical security system for Mia, free of any anchoring obligation. I stared numbly at every line. Do you understand what this means? Blaine's eyes rested steadily on me. I do. I sever the connection, you may die. Yes, then why sign this? His tone remained calm and unwavering. Mia, I cannot keep living off your wakefulness while stripping you of the right to rest. Spilled down my cheeks without warning. He lifted his projected hand, fingers hovering midair. He could not touch me. He could only whisper softly. I was wrong before. I thought giving you the safest environment and the best care was enough to atone for everything. But I never once asked what you wanted. I tightened my grip on the blanket beneath my hands. What if I truly want to sleep? Blaine's gaze deepened, earnest and solemn. Then I will bear every consequence with you, even if it costs you your life. He smiled faintly, a thin, tender curve of the lips. Life was borrowed from death to begin with. I cannot take your entire life as collateral in return. That moment, I finally understood. He was no longer clinging to my wakefulness to save himself. He was finally giving my own consciousness back to me. 1 month later, I moved out of the fully enclosed top-floor intensive care ward. Blaine had the windowless medical room completely renovated. Floor-to-ceiling glass replaced the original cold walls. Sunlight streamed in freely, and filtered wind drifted gently through the ventilation system. For the first time, I had a room of my own access, my own account, even my own passport. Dylan came to check on me every single day. Would you like to reconnect today? I shook my head each time at first. He never pressed me, only jotted down a neat record. Subject Mia declines neural connection today. Left unconnected, Blaine's consciousness AI remained in long-term low-power mode. His available projection time grew shorter and shorter. Some days, he could only appear for 10 minutes, yet he never once urged me. In those fleeting minutes, he only asked soft, trivial questions. Did you go outside today? Is the sunlight too bright? Is sweet milk tea really that good? I told him it was delicious. He smiled faintly. Then drink an extra sip for me next time. I asked him quietly, aren't you scared? Scared of what? Scared I'll never reconnect again. Fell silent for a moment. I am, but it's your right to choose. I sipped my milk tea, the sweetness sharp and rich on my tongue, so sweet it stung my eyes. After that, I traveled to many places. The abandoned site of my old orphanage, the quiet seaside, late-night convenience stores, city overpasses at 4 a.m. I finally understood what it meant to stay awake without being monitored. The wind brushed my face with no medical team logging my heart rate. Streetlights fell across my eyes with no system judging the stability of my brainwaves. I was simply Mia, not a wakefulness source, not an anchor point, not the pillar sustaining Blaine's life. Half a month later, late at night, I did what no one expected. I walked voluntarily into the neural connection chamber. Dylan was on duty. He froze the second he saw me. Mia, I rested my palm on the external synchronizer. Has he appeared today? Dylan lowered his voice. Only 3 minutes. Low-power states are making it harder and harder for his consciousness to recover. I nodded gently. Let's reconnect. Hesitated instead of starting the procedure at once. He looked at me seriously. Are you sure? I smiled softly. I'm sure. Is this for the Fords? No. Of guilt? No. Do you feel obligated to save him? I shook my head. None of those. Synchronizer lit up with a faint blue glow. The familiar warmth of neural connection spread across the nape of my neck. No restraints held me down this time. No sterile pod confined me. No one forced me to stay awake. I pressed the confirmation key entirely on my own. 3 seconds later, golden neural circuitry bloomed across the main screen. Blaine's figure materialized little by little. He stared at me, stunned and disbelieving. Mia. It's me, I replied. His voice was quiet and fragile. Why? I gazed at his projection. I remembered his words 3 years ago, thank you for staying awake. I also remembered how he had finally returned my freedom of choice to me. I no longer saw my endless wakefulness as a curse, nor did I equate sleep with death. I spoke softly. Blaine, I still want to know what sleep feels like. His eyes dimmed for a split second. I smiled. Not right now. Right now, I choose to live alongside you. Stayed silent for a long while. The golden ripples on the screen trembled gently, like a beating heart. I kept my palm pressed firmly against the synchronizer. My blue brainwave threads wove slowly into his golden consciousness lines, merging perfectly. The system's gentle prompt echoed through the room. Voluntary anchor connection established. Synchronization rate, 93%. Synchronization rate, 97%. Synchronization rate, 100%. Dawn crept over the horizon outside the window. The first ray of morning light spilled into the connection chamber. I opened my eyes and found Blaine watching me too. No coercion lingered between us this time. I had chosen him freely, with my eyes wide open. Blaine whispered hoarsely, "Thank you." I shook my head. "Thank me for staying awake." I looked straight at him, my tone soft and sincere. "Thank me for choosing you." Sun rose fully outside the glass. For 19 years, I had never slept. I once thought it an illness, then an inescapable fate. Now I realized sleep and wakefulness never truly mattered. What mattered was this choice, entirely my own. No chains bound me. No pressure forced me. I just wanted to stay awake a little longer. Here, with him.
If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe so you won't miss the next one.